Okay, let's go. 1, 2, 3. Okay, just staying with this for a little bit longer because it's kind of interesting stuff. If you shade water, it cools and sinks. If you heat water, it rises and expands and moves towards the cold. So if you can cool one end of your chinampa and heat up the other end, you're going to get a thermosiphon and a movement of water. So you start to look at the possibilities of putting a polytunnel or a glass house over one end and a shade house over the other end, or extra shade over one end and extra sun over the other end. There's all sorts of things you start to look at as a possibility to diversify and enrich a system like this. But I don't think you get very far down the track and you probably get quite satisfied with the results that you get in. And over a long period of evolution, you'd come up with different variations to the system. There's a picture up there of a system at Tagari Farm, and it's just being diversified at that stage. It's just getting a whole set of plants put on with a central footpath. And how wide are they? They're about 6 meters wide. 6 meters of water, 6 meters of land. And then just to give you a variation on that, here's one in Vietnam I just came across. And it's obviously quite shallow water. They've probably dropped the level in there. They're setting it up. They were planting different climbing beans on the trellises and crops, annual crops along the land strips. And I think they would have flooded it up a bit higher. But further over, there are chinampas that were growing fruit trees and quite perennial systems, mangoes even, further along. Mosquitoes? No mosquitoes, because you have fish. Enormous amount of fish ponds in Vietnam. In fact, there are more fish ponds than there are chicken pens, I think. It's more common to have a fish pond before a chicken pen. And very few mosquitoes, really, because there are always fish. The smallest body of water has a fish in it. And mosquitoes ideally breed in a hoof print of a cow or an animal. Muddy little puddle of hot water is an ideal breeding ground for a mosquito. Too small for a fish, too dirty to be seen, and you've got mosquitoes. Coconut husks are bad for mosquitoes. Old tin cans, bits of garbage, little plastic bags with tiny bit of hot water in it. That's where you get most of your mosquitoes, so you've got to be careful there. Everything, because in Vietnam they're so keen on fish, no matter how big, small, or whatever type, everything that can contain a fish will contain a fish. Yeah. And they're fish people. And they have pet fish that can be quite vicious as well. You don't put your finger in the little fish pond in a house. They're often quite vicious fish, or bite your finger. And that can be quite old. People have, quite old pet fish that they really like. But yeah, no problem there.
Are there any examples of things going wrong?
Sorry?
Are there any examples of things going wrong, or things to look out for to avoid?
I'm sure there'd be plenty of things that could go wrong, and fish systems or water systems, classically, when they go wrong, it all goes wrong at once. It's like a fish tank going wrong. All of a sudden, your fish are all belly up. You know something's wrong real quick. Especially when you don't have the experience of looking at the water. in Vietnam, they're very experienced. They can look at their water and their ponds like we can look at our gardens. You know, and they know that things need to be changed, or the water needs to be, they need to take some of the water weed off. As the water weed on the surface booms, they know there's too much, the input of nutrient is coming to maximum, so they pull off the water weed and mulch the land and stop inputting manure. So when they get to extremely sophisticated and very knowledgeable systems, they're actually inputting manure straight into the ponds. Don't try that. You really need to know what you're doing before you can do that. But you can get to the stage where you can manure your ponds with, you can have your pigs over your pond in cycles when you know what to expect and what's happening to the water as you do that, and all sorts of manures. Yeah, they've got it pretty worked out, and it all seems to work okay. But it looks quite questionable at times, and you'd have to work very slowly towards that with the species that you can use locally, and very strange things can happen. But what we're trying to stay on subject here, what we're actually talking about in here is landscape profiles, and we're in wetlands. Swamps and wetlands, some of us have asked, okay, well, can you put this on the side of a hill, or can you have these coming downhill, down a slope? Well, you don't usually get wetlands on slopes. Slopes drain. Okay, fair enough. That's an interesting question, though. And it makes us think back about design. It makes me think about particular things, because I don't think I have seen a chinampa on the side of a hill, because normally they are in these high water table swamps and wetlands. But then it's always worth extending your ideas about that sort of thing. And having laid out quite a few earthworks, and some pretty big ones at times, I actually took quite a few risks. I didn't realise I was taking risks. Bill told me later, and thought it was okay. But one property I put together about 9 or 10 years ago in Yamundi, laid out about 3 kilometres of swales around a landscape, about 60 acres of landscape. And that was the first sort of design that went in, Janet Millington's property at Yamundi. And it's ended up with about 9 or 10 dams, I think they have now. We only built about 4 dams in the initial stage. And there was one ridge line where we put up just a swale around the ridge, around the top of the ridge. Ended up with a timber forest on the top, and then another swale that came round and also just not connected to a dam, and then a third swale that came round and connected to a dam, and then there was another dam, and there was another dam over here and a 4th dam here, another ridge with a couple of swales on it, something like this. And the property boundary was here, and the property went on down. Bottom was a North Maruchi River down here, and I just initiated the process with Janet and started. I really themed the properties. There's not much she could do after I did this. I put in these are quite big swales. I actually built them with a D7 bulldozer, 28-ton bulldozer, and a 25-ton excavator with a tilt bucket. That's an angle bucket, so it tilts at 45 degrees with a laser level. Went round and bulldozed out rough terraces, then sat the 25-ton bulldozer on and worked backwards, building the swale like this and checking it with a laser level. These are quite large swales going down the hill like this. 25-ton excavator sits in here. Yeah. So So you can imagine you get a small tractor in there, about 3 meters across there. And these 5 swales added up to about 3 kilometers. You've got a rainfall of about 1.8 meters annually, maybe 2 meters on a big year in that district. Quite dry for 6 months of the year, quite wet for 6 months of the year, subtropics. The swales completely fill at certain times, completely fill to the top, near enough. Actually made a mistake. I thought these swales would not ever overflow. I was wrong. They did overflow. In fact, they broke. First set of swales, for the biggest set of swales I'd ever built at that stage, and the first ones that broke. So I'll admit my mistake there. But when swales break, it's not a big drama. There's not a lot of pressure in there. And it just takes out a tiny little cut out of the swale wall. You can repair it with a shovel and a wheelbarrow and a few hours' work. It's not like a dam collapsing, which is a major structure, compacted structure coming down. This is not a compacted mound. So we set up overflows as we should have done originally. And the system continued to work. And Janet went on to put in all kinds of other things. Crayfish ponds and filtration ponds and big storage dams and other swales and many, many developments and teach courses, all sorts of stuff on this property. And the forests that we planted up here are major forests now, very big. It's great to walk around those forests, walk around trees that are this big. We planted them, they were that big. You know, it's a wonderful thing to walk around a forest that you've planted that's that big. It feels like something. Eucalypts and rainforest trees in the bottom here. And there we're rainforest planting, silky oaks, crow's ash, blue quandong all grow that quick. Eucalypts grow that quick. Hoop pines grow that quick, if you get it right. And we ripped in between here with the bulldozer, which is pretty rough ripping, on contour, kind of keyline type ripping, not really. We were on contour. But I ripped round with a D7 bulldozer. A D7 bulldozer rips a big rip. Right? I mean, this is a rip. This is a rip, I tell you. This is a rip like this in real life. You've got to be careful walking across the paddock. You're going to break a leg. Right? I did that to infiltrate the water into this compacted slope. There was a lot of cows on there before. She bought it. There was a lot of cows. See, the first thing I told her to do, if she was serious, I was testing her actually. There was fence lines going right across this, squares. And I said, if you're real serious, take them fences out. Let's have another look at it. And she did. I thought, she's serious. Quite expensive fence lines. You own your fences. You think you're owning the... She took them out. And it was great. You could really see the landscape when you took them straight lines off. And I ripped these to make sure the water soaked in and to re-sponge the landscape between these swale lines. And I seeded it with all sorts of pioneer seeds. That was pretty radical. Just threw a load of pioneer seeds out by hand, going around like Johnny Appleseed with a big bag of mad pioneer leguminous tree seeds, native and non-native. A few of them came up, not all of them, but it pioneered itself, and it also kept Mick off. Mick's her husband. Right. And he's a scientist by trade, very academic man, but he does love, I noticed he loved his tractors and his gadgets and tools and stuff, and once we'd ripped it, you couldn't get on there with a tractor, right? And I knew he wouldn't be able to get on there and slash in between the swells. I wanted him off. They didn't realise that was half of the strategy, so there was no way back in there with a tractor, so it had to pioneer itself. And I didn't want her to waste her time trying to plant all those steep slopes, right? Because it's just, they had too much land anyway. Well, later on, getting to the point of the story, she decided to put a fourth swale on this slope here. Their house, they live in an illegal shed that's about a $60,000 shed, actually. But it's a very, very nice sort of house shed here. And they had Zone 1 garden and Zone 2's kind of around here somewhere. But Janet decided she's going to put another swale in here. This is about 2 or 3 years after the first part of the design went in. And she put a swale in here. I think it goes from about here, around here, a fourth swale. And it's up from the bottom of the hill. So it's, you know, you've got one swale up the top there, and you've got another swale. You come on down, you've got another swale. And then before you get to the bottom of the hill, she put another swale in here before you get to the bottom. So she was a good, still that bottom swale was a good, probably still eight meters up from the bottom of the hill. All of these by this time are grown trees. There's a forest on the top. There's all kinds of regrowth happening in between. And she put this one in, and within a few days, it filled up with water, and it never went down again. It became a canal. Oh, what do you call it? I don't know what you call it. It's a long pond. Right? She built a swale, and a swale you don't try and compact. Yeah? Swales are meant to leak to the land. They are soft. This is a soft mound. Sometimes you purposely rip here below the swale mound and even in the trench so that it purposely soaks in. The idea is to soak. It is not a dam wall that you compact. Be sure you tell your earth mover it is not a contour bank which you compact the mound. It is a soft earthwork feature. They're not used to those. That's the one. They're really not used to that idea. Right? But so she built this with the intention of it to leak, and it filled up and it stayed full. Now, it may have sealed now, but it was obviously not sealed 3 days after it was constructed, and yet at that stage it was full, and it has been full ever since. So she has a long pond round the hill. Where is the water coming from? It's not raining. It's dry season. There's bushfires out in the country behind Yamundi, and that's still full. It's up the side of the hill. It's the water that fell here 2 years before, and it will never empty because the water is slowly transiting through. The landscape is now the sponge it was when it was in the ancient forest, more or less, or a rough-ass version of it, that could put that same quality of forest back. That's the importance of these systems. That's how important those insignificant looking swales are. They don't look like they're doing anything. They're inert. You can't see the water. It's gone in. The sponge is full. And it doesn't matter that this end's drying because it's the dry season. By the time this sponge of water is still dripping out here, the next year's rainy seasons come back in the top and it's full again. And no matter if that dries off a little bit in the dry season, it doesn't even get down to the next swell, and the next rainy season's back in, and it will always do it. You will have to physically remove it to stop it happening. So now you have a great opportunity to either let it regrow itself back into forest or orchestrate what sort of forest you want. It's as simple as that. But you're asking me whether you can put chinampas down the hill. It looks like you can if you swale enough above your proposed chinampa. The Incas did do this in the high Andes. If you get up there in the high Andes, in the Valley of the Volcanoes up in Ecuador, you get up above the Valley of the Volcanoes, and there's an avenue of volcanoes on either side of you in the high Andes in Ecuador, you'll see remnants of absolutely level lines through the side of the hills. They put enough of those in that by the time it got to the high valley, there was running water like this. So you put enough of these in, even if you don't have dams. There is no dams in this section of that design. Just the swales are giving you a constant flow of water. Now you put another one in, you put another one in, you get another, they're all going to fill. From there on, that may even higher up, they may have even filled. We don't know. She was quite happy that she's got one. And then you can trellis that, and you can chinampa type take a Chinampa attitude on the design around that little swale, or whatever you like. So yeah, you could. You've got to set your sponge up above.
Jeff, are there any possibilities of causing a landslip?
Yes, plenty. Especially, yeah.
What do you need to watch out for?
Trees, put plenty in. Or let them grow, don't take them off. Ideally, put them in. Put your trees, especially if you start going into steep country, swaling steep country is more imperative to tree as quickly as possible, or let trees grow. Swales, get it right, swales are a tree growing system. They are growing trees. So when you ask me is, can you take Chinampas up the hill like this, or can you have, what did you ask me, stepped Chinampa systems, they kind of become long contour ponds. A pond couldn't be anything but on contour, can it? Because if you can make water stand on its end, I'll pay you $1 million right now. We'll go and make a lot of money, right? But I can't make water stand on its end, right? But if you can, you know, so if you start doing this, I think you also, if it's, it won't be that steep a country, it will be lower down the hill, but watch out for stability. But, so let me just explain this in another way. This is like a sponge, yeah? Imagine that as a sponge. Yeah? If I get a cup full of water, right, and there's a dry sponge, pretty dry, I get a cup full of water, and I just tip it on there, most of it's going to pour off on the table. That's what it's like in a desert. Somebody asked, can you put Chinampas in a desert? Who asked that? Somebody did. Yeah. Can you put Chinampas in? Yeah, you can. But just think of it, this is how you have to think about deserts. Deserts are like an absolutely bone-dry sponge. Right? And all of a sudden, once a year, a ton of water falls on top of it, boom. And if I do that to that sponge, most of it falls off. It will all go on the table. So what I have to do is like this. I have to stop the water running over the sponge and soak it in. Now, if I get that sponge now, and I get that water in this cup, and I drip it in slowly, just like a swell soaks it in, it will soak, and this sponge will swell, and it will fill completely. And when it's full, if I carry on dripping it in, every drip I put in, a drip comes out the bottom. One drip in, one drip out, once the sponge is full. But I've got to fill this sponge slowly so that I don't get a huge amount of runoff. And that's what happens in deserts. You've got a completely dry sponge, and you get all your water in one rain, and it all runs off. And there's no desert forest left with a root net that can help it soak. And there's all kinds of damaging elements out there in the desert, and most of the features you're looking at are erosion features which just help that water run away. So if you can do this sort of thing and plant it up to trees, you'll soak your sponge slowly, she'll swell up, and she'll hold that water for most of the year. And it'll hold from year to year to year to year to year. You can hold 10 years worth of water with 1 year's rain. If you terraform the landscape to receive the water, and that's what all of us are in the same situation, whether you're in the wet tropics or not, really. Not the one I was talking about, no. It's just the ripper on the back of the bulldozer, which is a very crude, great big set of tooths that stick down behind. They use to break up the ground so they can loosen up the ground to push it. So I was doing very crude ripping around there. But that actually meant that the water was soaking in more, even between the swales. And it had this effect. That's the interesting thing. It had that effect. Created a long pond in an unsealed piece of earthworks. Over time, just all the detritus matter falling in there would have sealed it, will have sealed it. Okay, we'll go on to our last landscape profile, which is estuaries. we don't really get the ability, or they're not available to us, estuaries, most of the time now. They're not something that you're going to buy an estuary somewhere, or you know, even get to work an estuary. Most of them are under some sort of protection. They are at the bottom of systems, the bottom of river systems, the bottom of catchment systems. So they're often in a lot of trouble. They're very rich systems. The richest systems, the richest ecologies on Earth in diversity of species are the tropical mangroves, because you have enormous amount of edges. You have the salt water to the freshwater edge, the freshwater to the land, the salt water to the land, the tidal mix in between, and all the vertical layers going in and out of the water. And there's many more than that. There's the anaerobic mud layer, and just the tidal mud layer, and the dry land on the outside of that. And this is why there's so much diversity there. There's all sorts of things we could do to enhance estuaries so they were more productive, and we could farm with all sorts of fish traps, fish farms, shellfish farms, oyster farms. All those sort of things have been done, and some are still done. We could look at the patterns of estuaries and enhance their ability to be more productive. There are often things like very useful mulches that are produced in estuaries, like seagrass, which has been traditionally used. Seagrasses exist in a lot of the cooler climates, estuaries, and it's a great grass that molts every year, and a large amount of it goes out to sea, and makes a fantastic mulch for gardens, because it's high in silica, slow to break down, doesn't necessarily feed the ground, but is a great weed suppressant, because it's slow to break down. There's no weed seed in it that will grow on the land. And you could set up traps out in estuaries where the estuary flows out to the ocean. You can set up rock traps, rock wall traps that would trap lots of seagrass as it comes down before it goes on out to the ocean. Harmonic type hooks coming out that would actually pick up the seagrass as it flows through, much as you can on the floodplain. You can put out tree belts on a floodplain that pick up mulches on the uphill side and deposit silts on the lower side, and you can build up banks on floodplains of higher ground and huge quantities of mulch on the upper side of specific tree belts. Bamboo, lines of bamboo do this very well on floodplains. Seagrass is quite an interesting product, because it was used for insulation for many, many years. It was a product that was harvested for insulating houses. And you find a lot of old European houses full of seagrass in the roof and the walls. When I was working in Denmark at Christiania, they used to recycle house materials. They used to go out into Copenhagen, the residents of Christiania. It's the only inner capital city alternative community in the world, I think, Christiania. And they had a recycle team go out and help demolish houses and bring back all sorts of building material. And they had a lot of seagrass, and I used it for mulch, and it was 100 years old. I used 100-year-old seagrass on some of the gardens. And
You know what its R value is, Jim?
it would be something like straw if you packed it up. It goes really curly, like shredded paper. It'd be very similar to straw.
That's knotweed.
Knotweed, probably Japanese knotweed is a curse of New York State, yeah? New York State river systems. Knotweed is probably a little bit higher in nitrogen, so it might rot down, might not dry quite as well. The seagrass is high in silica, like wheat straw, probably even better than wheat straw. So it's an interesting insulation And I had a lot of people walk past. Christiania has the whole world in tourists walking past. There's people from all countries all over the world visiting Christiania. I had many, many people stop and tell me, you can't garden like that. From all different nationalities. When we were putting this mulch garden together with seagrass, there was an endless procession of people walking past saying, what are you doing? And I said, we're laying down a garden. And they'd say, you can't garden like that. I said, and I always ask people, do you grow your own food? All your own food? No. Most of your own food? No. You ever grow any food? No. Have you ever put a garden in? Oh, a bit, you know. And how do you know that I can't do this then? And I started to realize people from all over the world seem to be able to very easily adopt an opinion about how you can garden. And maybe it's something inherently that we believe we can do, yet we may never have done it. It's surprising. I've gone out of my way to garden in the most unusual ways to see what you can do. I might tell you about some of them later. You know, laying down 2 or 3 telephone books thick of mulch and, you know, whole straw bales on top of concrete roofs. It's surprising what you can do. You can do things that you wouldn't imagine. You can do techniques of gardening. How many Americans do we have in the room? North Americans, not South Americans? North Americans? How many was that? Sorry, I missed with our Colombian putting his hand up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 out of 60 odd, that's not too bad. You're nearly, what, 1/6 of us? 1/7 of us in the room? Okay. They always used to say, when I was working in South America, they'd say, oh, where are you from? You say, America. Someone would say, oh, America, and they'd say, which America? North or south or central. Okay. As there's such a catastrophic event that's just happened in New Orleans and in the Gulf States, where I've been doing quite a lot of work. I promised some of my mates over there I'd bring this up, and this is a good enough time talking about estuaries, because New Orleans, as everybody probably knows now with the news, New Orleans is at the mouth, almost at the mouth of one of the largest rivers on earth. It's an order 2 river. It's not nowhere near as big as the Amazon, but it's in the second order of rivers. It's in, it's in the category of the Nile and the Mekong and the Yellow River and the Yangtze and those. You know, it's one of those order 2s, massive river system. When you look at it as a branching pattern, it's like a great big bush. It hasn't got much of a trunk. It's like a massive great shrub when you look at the pattern of the Mississippi. Is it 1/3 or 2/3 of North America's catchment?
You said 2/3.
I think it is 2/3 of North America. Some of it's actually coming out of Canada. Yeah, the catchment. So it's let's try and get this right now. It goes this way. The bird's foot. I'll be a bit smaller than that. The bird's foot, where the delta comes out, and then it's this great big, comes out of Texas over here. It's not much of a trunk on it, branches straight away. It's this great big branching system. And it's actually built what they call the bird's foot out there, or that's what they tell you on the maps. I'm going to tell you it's not actually there. It wasn't there last year before Katrina, so I know it's not there now. I know, because I was fishing where there was supposed to be land. This is a massive system. And this pattern here, every 100 or so years, it is said that the river changed its course and the main entrance went out another way. There's a system over here called the Atchafalaya Swamp. Amazing system, huge wetland system, the Atchafalaya, really worth having a look at. And there's a channel there that it would prefer to be going down right now, but we decided to not let that happen. Now, each one of these lines here, it's like aerial roots of a giant tree. Each one of these is on a ridge line, and the river's up there. The river's up like that.
So it's not a true delta.
It is a delta. This down here is a deposition system. How do you spell that? Depo? Say it. T? Yeah? Thanks. I got myself in trouble there. I know how to say it, but not spell it. All right. It's a deposition system. So it deposited huge amounts of silts and sediments and organic material out here. But this was a massive cypress swamp. It was a massive swamp. So millions of years of floods came through here, through this great big filtering swamp system, which slowed it down. The bayous in the swamps moved very, very slowly. And because of the slow movement and the filtering of the swamp, it dropped out all these silts and sediments and built these ridge lines. People have settled all on these. There's towns, the towns are quite long down the ridge lines. And what we've done is we put levees in to control the river, and we've gone 4 states up with levee banks. And we've put barrage dams in as well to stop the flood so that the mouth of the river can be settled around New Orleans and all the way up, Baton Rouge, the capital of Louisiana, Lafayette, further up. And we also discovered a lot of oil in there, in these great big filtration swamps here. And when they put in oil canals, the oils area, they put in a canal to an oil rig out here, and they dig a canal out through the swamp without any pattern at all. They just put all the spoils, all the diggings from the canal, all down one side. Straight canal to an oil rig. With a mound on one side. So when you look at the map here of the dug canals, it's just a straight grid like this of canals. There's no harmonic pattern to it at all. It's just, it looks like a grid-lined suburb. There's none of these oil canals are working anymore because they run out of oil in that section, but the canals are still there. And each one of these has a haphazard bank next to it of soil. Just out, of what the diggings from the canal. All the oil's out here. The oil wells are out here now. Rigs out in the ocean. And so we stopped the flooding. We put this unharmonic pattern all through the swamps. We stop the flow of the river by barrage dams here and there, but when the flood comes, it comes out. Barrage dams let the water over the top anyway. And all the silts and sediments that do come through from all this catchment, whatever runs off up here from agricultural chemicals, soil erosion, and whatever else is dumped in the catchment, which is quite an extreme cocktail you would imagine, comes shooting out here, right, out of the bird's mouth, and you get a shifting hypoxia zone. It's called a dead zone. Sometimes it's here, sometimes it's here, sometimes it goes a bit this way. It changes from year to year, right, with the seasonal floods. And it's about 10,000 kilometers square of the Gulf of Mexico that's more or less lifeless. And it's not constantly in one place, so that's a bit of a hassle. It's moving about. And it just so happens that the southern states here, the lower half of North America, this section here, is on a geological tilt that's going down. So you have, you can't believe, if you go to the Atchafalaya swamp, you can't believe how rich a system it is. Still, if you read the early colonist reports, even the old black and white photographs, it's unbelievable what you see. And there's people stood there photographed next to 5,000 ducks. You know, a few men have shot in a day, you know, 1,000 fish, you know, it's enormously productive life system. It's the Amazon of North America. But this whole section here is tilting down. It's naturally tilting. It's a geological tilt of 50 millimeters a year going down. And that was compensated. This area was all compensated with the deposition, which has been stopped. So now it is going down. And a football pitch is about half a hectare. Yeah. A football pitch is 50 meters by 100 meters, more or less. Right? A hectare is 100 meters by 100 meters, 10,000 square meters. So it's half a hectare. Every 30 minutes. Going down under the ocean. The freshwater swamps, which are back here, are turned into saltwater swamps. So if you want to put that, that's 1 square kilometre every 4 days. We were working with these people this time last year. This is recent information. Right? We had the people in our permaculture course. In fact, in August last year, we were evacuated out of New Orleans with 1 million people because Cyclone Ivan was coming. Cyclone Ivan missed and hit over here somewhere. And there wasn't any damage in New Orleans, but a year later, we all know what happened. But this is a scenario of an extremely rich system. A lot of these areas out here have been drained, levee banks, agricultural drains, and rice production put in. A monoculture grain crop where there was one of the richest of ecological systems. I mean, okay, it was complicated and a little bit hard to harvest, but from one extreme to another, from an extremely diverse, eternally sustainable and fertile to a monoculture, industrialized, chemically supported agriculture that's also allowing the landscape to sink. But when you actually get out here, it's interesting, when you get out here on the bird's foot, right, there's no land there. There's just the levee banks. There's a little town at the end called Venice, mostly fishermen. And there's just, it's like the skeleton of the bird's foot. There's just a few ridges. Everything else is underwater. The map's not true. If you get a chance, Google a satellite map if you can get one. Have a look at a satellite photograph of the bird's foot or this area. It's a real shock because the map you study in geography is not correct. It's just the skeleton of the original map. It's all underwater. And we're not told very much about it. We just happen to have been working right there. So the Army Corps of Engineers built all this, and I've actually worked for the Army Corps of Engineers in northwest Louisiana, up on the Red River here at Shreveport, Bossier City, on the Army Ammunition Manufacturing Plant. They used to write our paychecks out of Rock Island, Illinois. And I had to put in engineering plans to be approved by the Army Corps of Engineers, and they approved my swales. I had to do really sophisticated plans for swales and fish ponds and chinampas, right, for the Army Corps of Engineers, and they approved our plans. So I had some credibility with them, and we actually got to talk to them about this stuff. And they said, well, we asked the government for $14 billion to try and rectify this problem 8 years ago, but we didn't get the money. Now it's going to cost estimated $250 billion to repair the problem of what's happened. Not that they may have got it right, but they wanted $14 billion 8 or 9 years ago, I think it was, to start some sort of redesign. And they said to us, what would you do? What would you do then? What's the permaculture attitude to this? So what would you do, crew? Start at the top. Which is kind of funny. I couldn't help but giggle a little bit. It's just like nearly 2/3 of North America we're talking about. Oh well. Want a big job? We can design, that scale doesn't matter. It's the same iteration of pattern from the top down. An hour, at least. But yeah, you're going to have really, I mean, trying to fix it here, I mean, you can do some stuff. I am actually involved in a design team right now who are looking at this. And, you know, what do? You know, we compost some of the houses and shred them up and make, you know, compost remediation systems to drain out some of the toxicity. I tell you, there's all sorts of chat going on, isn't there, Andrew? I mean, I'm getting emails every day from this team that we've got there. I mean, we've got people in Tulane University teaching this course. In one of the main universities of New Orleans have accepted permaculture in part of their curriculum, are teaching this course in American University. We're just about to teach a day after Thanksgiving, 28th of November. We start a course right up here at Wisconsin, on the Wisconsin River. So it's kind of interesting. We're in a university about to teach up here. We're already in one down here. We've just got to fix the bit up in between. We get these guys. These guys are already talking to these guys. Any of you other guys in the catchment, better get together there. Texas, you're on the outside there. Some are over in this branch, you know. Some of you other guys must be out here somewhere probably. You're up there, yeah? You're in this tree somewhere probably, unless you're on the other side of the Rockies, you know. But so you really need to start rethinking, repatterning the catchment from the top down. And you fix it up. You could fix it up all the way to the bottom. You make this the most, you know, you don't need to import food. But the funny thing is, Louisiana's famous for catfish and crawfish. We call them yabbies, they call them crawfish, right? Little crayfish, freshwater crayfish. They've got some really easy to grow crayfish. They grow them in the rice fields. They flood the rice fields and grow rice in the dry season. They all go underground and come back out when they flood it. They eat much easier than ours. Australia has the largest diversity of freshwater crayfish in the world, 80 different varieties. You've got a dinosaur in Tassie that's 1 metre long. There are old pictures of people holding up claws like this and the tail just touching the ground, part of the megafauna. It's a dinosaur. You can't have an exoskeleton bigger than that. But anyway, these guys are famous, we'll get on to that in aquaculture. These guys are famous for crawfish and catfish. Except most of their crawfish and catfish, their crayfish, most of their freshwater crayfish are now imported from China. And most of their catfish come from Vietnam. They won't let them in at the moment. Yeah. But they have been importing, they have been bringing them in from Vietnam, the country they went to war. Well, the Vietnamese call it the American War. So, you know, there's things that people are famous for producing here are now major imports, and there's all this opportunity, and what you really need to do is start swaling up here. And I think, where did that blackboard go? I think that makes it pretty obvious what we just talked about there. I'll try and get them both in the picture. But when you're talking about that catchment, and you're talking about what we just talked about here, with sponging catchments and creating long contour ponds and stabilizing water and making water go nice and slow, the longest path over the most time, over the most distance, with the most friction, passive friction, rubbing up against as many things as possible. I don't like to see water going quicker than a very slow walk through the landscape like that, creeping. If it's any quicker than that, I'm getting worried. Right? I want to slow it down. Tree roots move very slowly. Right? So if you can do this, and if you can get a contour pond within 2 or 3 years, just from chucking a few swales around the hill on contour, on an old cow paddock that's beaten down in southeast Queensland, I'm sure the American government can sort that out, right? I mean, you've got a company called Caterpillar just over here in Texas, right? Make some of the best machines I've ever seen. I nearly got a tour of the factory. I'd love to have a look at the Caterpillar factory. Reconstructive earth surgery, no problem. We have the technology, right? So I'm just putting that out to all you North Americans there. We can do a real fix-up job, set an example to the world. You've got a job that needs doing. You know, George Bush wanted to repair the marshes of Iraq. He wanted to spend $20 billion repairing the marsh Arabs, the marshes of Iraq, where the Euphrates and the Tigris come together just northeast of Basra, another famous part of the world at the moment. We all know where I'm talking about, yeah? The Adan Arabs, famous, possibly the Garden of Eden recorded in the Bible. It's a kind of natural Chinampa system, right? A bit like Chinampas. They built up their land with different marsh reeds. Saddam Hussein drained a lot of that. And there was a proposal to repair it again, but the people of Louisiana and the southern states wouldn't let George spend that money because he wouldn't repair this. He wouldn't give them the $14 billion to start the repair mechanism here, right? And there was no way they were going to let him spend $20 billion over in Iraq repairing the marsh Arabs landscape. And now look what's happened. So, you know, you never know where you might be working. Just because you're sort of having trouble sort of putting systems together right at the moment, a little bit of practice, you could be anywhere working on one of the repair systems, one of the major rivers of the world. Don't underestimate where you might end up. Could end up anywhere. And it's all quite simple to work on. Right? That systems, after a while, appear quite simple to you. And it's the simplicity of what we need to do over the large area. And this is a fantastic landscape. Okay, we better answer some questions. So you have to increase deposition. Don't push things uphill. Don't swim upstream. Swim downstream. It's a lot easier. Go with it. We have to increase deposition, definitely. New Orleans may be badly positioned. There may be ways around that. It's not impossible to say. You can sit in New Orleans in a cafe. You don't notice the river because of the levee banks sitting there. that New Orleans does not show off the Mississippi. It's a major city that does not show off the river, which is unusual, I find. Most cities on big rivers show off the river. Even the Nile in Cairo is shown off. But you're sitting there in a cafe in downtown New Orleans, and there's a big bank there. You don't really notice what it is, a levee bank, until a ship goes past. Especially if it's an unloaded ship, and you're sitting there having a cappuccino, and there's a ship going past. It's up there. And you kind of think, hold on, it's this huge thing going past it. Oh, shit. You know, we're about 20 foot under the river. Yeah. You are. With obvious consequences. Explain the water flow into and out of trombe systems. Okay, the water comes down 100 feet or so, more or less comes up under a bell chamber. The water and the air is released and compressed. The air is compressed in the bell chamber where it can be taken off. And in a simple system, the water, after it's gassed off, the bubbles, comes out the bottom of the bell chamber and back to the stream flow, but 100 foot lower. That's the simplest way to understand it. Right? If you want it to rise up further, you have to put it back into a riser pipe so it comes close to the original head. It won't go back to the exact original head and flows on down the streamline. Who's Daniel? Daniel? Understandable? Water always finds its own level. Yeah? After it's gone, released in the bell chamber, and in that still chamber, interestingly, water drops what it's carrying. In this case, it's compressed air bubbles. They rise to the surface. They gas off in the bell chamber. The bell shape helps pressurize it, and it pushes the water down a bit. So it puts pressure on that water. You have to get this specific size in relation to the amount of water you're dropping. And then off from the bottom, it can either flow straight off, or it can go back up a riser pipe of the same size and out, finding its own, roughly its own level where it started.
I think that would have to be a closed tank at the bottom.
It would have to be close if you want to go up a riser, yeah. But if you don't, you can flow it off.
Yeah. But it's not the pressure on the chamber, the one that makes sure the water goes all the way back. This side, you know, the building up of pressure inside the chamber.
In the chamber, in here,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that pressure that builds up there, isn't that the one that makes the water go back all the way up?
yeah, but it probably is, but we need some of that pressure taken off to, you know, get some pressure, compressed air off there. Right, you can't dissipate all that pressure by lifting the water back.
You could return the water back to reuse it.
I don't think you can go all the way. Some of it's taken in that chamber, so you can't go quite to the top. What are some good ways of suppressing insects, such as fruit flies and mosquitoes, in compost bins? Don't use a bin. That's my first of all. I'm a compost artist. I can guarantee that I can explain anything you like about compost, because I'm a compost. I consider myself quite an expert, actually. I've made a lot of compost, and I've made compost that people want to buy off me. And I've taught people to make compost all over the world. I can make compost in 11 days. I can guarantee that I can teach you how to make compost in 18 days. After a couple of practices, I'm sure you can do it. I've made compost during a course. And compost is a colloid, if you look it up in the dictionary. So then when you look colloid up in the dictionary, it's something that's made up of very small particles, smaller than 15 microns. Soap is a colloid. This chalk dust is a colloid. Right? That's true compost. And if you're composting properly, right, you're making a humus. You're orchestrating a very fancy quite a sexy humus. And you're orchestrating lots and lots of life and death. It's a thermonuclear explosion of life and death over a fast period. And there's quite specifics. And it must get to 50 degrees centigrade to work quickly, and it can't get above 70 degrees centigrade, and none of your insects live in there. In fact, they become part of it in the fast cycles in an aerobic compost. If you're talking about an anaerobic compost, which is a slower process, where you're not turning it so often, or there's not so much air involved, then it has to be very specifically layered. Right? And it's very accurately layered. And one of the problems with bins, or these bins that are supplied to you, is they don't supply really accurate and exact information about how they should be layered. You must layer it, and the method that you need to study for a bin method, and I presume you're talking about these plastic bins with a top on. And you take the top off, later on it goes boom, and it's a methane digester. See, we've changed the terminology. People put this bucket on in their kitchen, and they say, oh, that's our compost. Wrong. That's your veggie scraps and fruit scraps. That's not your compost. That's not a colloid. That's a load of food scraps sitting on your sink. We've called that wrongly compost. That's not compost. Compost is black. The Biodynamic Society did some very long-term experiments where most people haven't done those. And they put a load of pipes together, like concrete pipes, and they filled them up with soil, and they put synthetic fertilizer in one, and they put different manures in other pipes, and they put compost in another pipe, different quality compost, but composts, and then they covered them up, and they went back and checked the soil to see how long it would take to find how long the synthetic fertilizer lasted in the soil in the pipe. Big pipe sitting in a field with a cover on it. And after a mesh cover, so nothing can get in and interfere with it, but the rain can come through and the weather. After 18 months, you can't find the synthetic fertilizer. It's gone. It's all washed away because it's water soluble. It's like sugar in your tea. It just washes away with water. 4 or 5 years later, all your manure's gone. "17 years later, they found the last compost. It is an imitation of the humus that's created under the forest, where you orchestrate what you put in it. And the only rules about the ingredients is, if it's lived, it can live again. And some of the things that haven't lived can live for the first time, I think. You can add all kinds of rock dust and different things. But so, you know, if you stack it up right, and hopefully I will have time to take you through the Berkeley method. The indoor method of composting is the layered method. And the Berkeley method is the fast aerobic method. And I like to try and teach you that one because it's infallible. If you follow my instructions exactly, it will work. And in 18 days, you don't get disillusioned. Right? You've got 1 cubic meter of high-grade stuff. And you start off with 1 cubic meter, and if you're good, you end up with 1 cubic meter. Hopefully. I can do it pretty fast for you, like we can compost pretty fast. But it's a set of diagrams.
But that's ongoing every day putting material in.
No.
Because we get material out of our kitchen every day, which will compost eventually.
Yeah, well, you either... You need a worm farm.
Yeah.
Worm farms do that. Compost is like baking a cake. You can't add to the cake when it's half cooked. It needs to get to 50 to 70 degrees centigrade in an aerobic fast compost. So you make it with an accumulation of materials. 18 days later, it's ready. If you want to add every day, you need a worm farm, a compost worm farm. That we can explain as well. You just need a bath or a sink, and you can make it. Easy. So, you know, regular additions.
Is it damaging for it to go to 70? Does it destroy fungi at 70 or just below?
No, not necessarily. There aren't any fungi involved at that stage because it's still in this processing where everything's breaking down. At 50 degrees C, most seeds become infertile, but not some, like tomatoes and pak choy and bok choy and stuff like that. At 70 degrees C, all seeds become infertile. Nothing will grow out of one that reaches 70 degrees C.
What's the white stuff you start to see when you're getting it really hot, over 60 degrees, up near the surface?
Yeah, those are fungal hyphae that are there on the surface, and they're starting to contribute to it. And they'll still be there at 70 because you can't make the outside of the heap 70. You can only make the internal. Yeah, so when you turn it, that fungi that's on the outside gets included on the inside and becomes part of the whole process. So it truly is a life and death process. And what you make it with, it changes the ingredients that you get at the end. So if you put a lot of potassium-rich substance in, you end up with a potassium-rich compost. Nitrogen-rich, and on you go. And you can compost all kinds of things. There's a lot of rubbish. It's a rubbish thing, but there's a lot of rubbish talked about compost. I like to shock people with compost. We composted a wallaby, didn't we, on the course last year, on a hippie community, roadkills. Love to put them back through the garden. 3 days, most of it's gone. Cooked, gone. 4 or 5 days later, you just got 1 or 2 bones. 11 days later, nothing. Can't find it. I did a duck in my daughter's garden there. Yeah, I'll tell you that story later. Suppressing insects such as fruit flies and mosquitoes that's just purely to do with compost, yeah?
You're doing compost later, right?
I will, yeah. Hopefully I will. In regards to, what is this? Oh, right. I thought it was like narwhals in the Arctic. And things would be. This is an Eskimo question. How did you decide which plants to grow to use to provide a healthy, balanced, nutritional diet? Easy. You know the healthiest diet you can have? Yeah, it's the most diverse diet that grows in the garden outside where you sleep. That's the healthiest food you can eat. Is the food that grows in the soil in your garden outside of the house where you sleep. It's a symbiotic relationship in relation to the dirt that you're getting under your fingernails, right? The insects that bite you in your garden, in your landscape, the tree pollen that blows off the trees. You know, if you're here for longevity, let's get it out of the way now, right? If you're here for longevity, there's repeated things that come up, right? People who live a long time, right, everywhere in the world, they eat local food when it's ripe, where it's grown in their local community. Otherwise, they store local food with natural preservation techniques. They also usually eat some connected element to the larger bioregion, like natural honey. Make sure it's not heat treated, otherwise the enzymes are dead. There's dead honey and live honey. If you put it in the fridge and it crystallizes, the enzymes are still alive. That's the enzymes alive crystallizing the honey. Heat treated honey is a different thing. Honey is never the same thing, and it comes from millions of different trees, but it is alive. Right? If you heat treat it, it doesn't crystallize and the enzymes are not alive. Also, things like migratory fish oils or migratory birds that fly through your local environment are often things that people live a long time eat. And they don't travel. They stay in one place because they keep eating that natural, local, organic food. Right? So they don't move around. They don't do great big international plane flights, for sure. Right? they stay local, and they eat local food, and they eat something that connects them to the local, larger environment. So the healthiest food you can eat, and I don't think it matters where it comes from if it's not native or endemic, is your local food, where the most diverse vegetable or fruit garden you can put in where you live, right, is the healthiest thing you can eat. And that's all we did there. I mean, extremely diverse, 1/4 acre zone 1, as diverse as possible 1 acre food forest, 2 dairy cows, right, which they milk and get cheese from and make their own butter. They have some pig tractors. They have about 70 chooks and ducks. They have some geese. They kill a dairy calf once or twice a year. So they get their own fresh meat from the poultry, the cows and the pigs. Pigs are very fast. You keep a male pig, you have to kill him in about 4 months. When he gets sexually mature, he'll taint the meat. Female pig might go on to be ham or bacon at about 8 months, but that's it. After that, they get too big. So male's about 4 months, female's about 8 months. Dairy cow gets pregnant to give you milk at least every 18 months. At 2 years the outside, she has a pregnancy exactly the same as a woman. It's exactly 9 months. She has a monthly cycle exactly the same as a woman. Right? So you're going to kill a dairy cow I like to kill them at about 8 months. And you've got a big chunk of meat going in the freezer. It's a lot easier than killing 100 chickens or 200 chickens in the equivalent amount of protein. Just 1 death instead of 200. You're eating everything that's local where you are. And if you're putting minerals through your animals, if you're putting all different rock minerals through your animals, then you're cycling minerals through the land and back to your animals and through you and through your compost toilet and back to your vegetable garden. It's getting all very symbiotic. And you get, bitten by a lot of the local insects and stuff like that. That's what you need to do. No problem. That's the healthiest existence there is. That's paradise. And it's very meaningful stuff, especially if you can help other people get there. Sometimes I wish I didn't teach so well. I'm only teaching because I get a result. I tell you that, I've got no problem whatsoever about going home and gardening. None at all. I've absolutely got no problem with it at all. It doesn't scare me one little bit. I'd love you to let me go, right? But the trouble is, I genuinely would love every single one of you to become a better designer and a better teacher than me. And that's all I'm here trying to do. And because I keep trying to do that, I keep getting a result, and I keep getting asked to do it. And what do? Say no while the world dies? No. You keep going trying to help people. And because I really want to help you to be better designers and better teachers, and nothing would make me happier than you guys to be better teachers than me. It'd be great. I could start thinking about going home. That's what makes you a good teacher. Don't be selfish and lock up the information. Glee can be used to seal dams in sand in cold climates? Yes. Glee will seal anything, anywhere, most of the time. You may have to wait, and manure is like glee. Put enough ducks and put enough shit in the pond and it'll seal up. Duck ponds are often not sealed originally. They're just filled up with water and filled with ducks and waterfowl, and all the shit seals it up. Manure is as fine as organic matter. Organic matter has the same particle size as clay. That's why it seals things up. Clay is the smallest soil particles. Organic matter is exactly the same, except it floats. When you do your jar test for soil, sand at the bottom, then loam, then clay, and then organic matter settles on the top just because it's lighter. It has the same particle size as clay, so it bungs things up. And manure is the same. It's just organic matter put through an animal and pooped out the other end. So your duck ponds, if you put enough ducks over them, will seal up. Let's go. 1, 2, 3.